And during the last years, I've been spending my time looking at players' motivation to play video games. So I did a lot of qualitative research, qualitative interviews, participant observations, focusing on their motivation to play and on the impact play has in their social lives. So what meaning does play have for the biographies? And this led me to a theory that also was somehow has manifested itself in my dissertation that has just been finished, which is discussing games as counter places. So games as places or worlds people can go to in order to evade certain power structures. And 2 years ago, I think on Frog, I had a talk called Virtual Rebellions, and I was talking about I would say, positive aspects of that. And I tried to show how people use these games to feel empowerment. And today, I think it's a more pessimistic take that that will catch up on a lot of thoughts we've heard today. Also, thoughts from Scott Osterwell yesterday. Focusing on the neoliberal logic that is deeply built into these games. But if you talk about games as counter places, I think it's important to look into that theory a little deeper before I go on with my argument, which is a deep dive into the theory of immersion, if you will. So the classical picture of immersion would be that you have a player that moves through some form of ontological wall, which in our case usually is the screen, to be somebody else, someone else behind that screen. And that's this old picture that you will get very often if you discuss video games with parents and teachers and so on. But if you ever played games yourself, or if you looked through the research in the last years, you might have come to realize that this is not the way this works. It's rather, it's a status of in-betweenness. You're inside and outside of the game at the same time. And that's what makes playing games so interesting for us. It's what Gordon Kalecha calls incorporation. On the one hand, we always know about our physical position in front of the screen, about us having to put in controls via a mouse or a controller. But at the same time, we can have some form of bodily experience of the game, of the play world, and immerse ourselves into these games. And this mode of in-betweenness is, as I would argue, the basis for the empowerment that many games deliver to us. And if we looked at this through the theories of Jesper Juhl, he would call this half-real, which is, I think, a really useful term, but it doesn't go quite far enough for me because it still sticks to this dichotomy of real and unreal, or in-game and outside of the game, which, as I would want to argue, does not exist if you really deep dive into what is really happening there. If you're interested in doing that, in looking deeper into that, I would really recommend to you to read post-humanist theory, because there these aspects get discussed to a much further status. So, for example, Melnick and Melnick, they write, by nature, the new media requires the player to become a cyborg-like entity, making use of double interface in order to extend beyond herself into a different world. Here she may experience a plurality of identities and selves, while at the same time becoming part of a player subjectivity that consists not only of her real self, but also of the game's programming and of the in-game characters she engages. So there are a lot of different layers to this, and they come to their conclusion of this paragraph where they say agency is no longer centered in the self, but rather distributed across the latter components. That's something we've heard of in the last talk also. Agency, even though games try to give us a very strong feeling of agency, agency really is distributed, not just it's not just there for us, but it's also on the side of the programming and of the game design, of course. So coming back to Jesper Juhl, he says that what the opportunity this gives us is that games invite us to some emotional gambles. We for ourselves can decide how serious we want to take these games, and by investing emotion into the game, we can greaten the successes we can live through in the game. So if I try really hard and I really get invested into a game, then it will be a much nicer experience, much stronger experience for me to succeed in the game. But at the same time, I have the possibility to say, well, it's just a game. Now I want to quit. It's annoying me, or the fact that I'm not good at it doesn't mean anything. Probably many of you will know that from themselves. If you invest a lot and in the end you fail and you're not good enough to win the game, then you might very easily turn to this argumentation of saying, well, it's just a game, it doesn't mean anything, even though maybe somewhere deep down you feel different about it because you've invested a lot of time and emotion into this game. And Jesper Juhl goes on to say that playing games is very much about managing risks. So it's, on the one hand, it's our risk to invest emotions and time into the game, knowing that if we're not able to beat the game, for example, this will always be one thing that we didn't manage to do. Or if we play against others, there's always the risk of losing. But this goes much further because, as we've heard today in different versions, what games do, and I think more and more do, if you look at games throughout the last years, is that they propose to us that it's all on us. If you try hard, if you invest yourself, if you give your best, then you have the possibility to win this game. Then you have the possibility to get good at this. And if you don't manage to get good at it, if you don't manage to beat the game, then it's your fault because you didn't try hard enough. And this, I think this is very obvious, is where the relations to the neoliberal system come in and seem to be inevitable. So for example, if we quote Berg here, he says the risk industry encourages subjects to take responsibility for themselves by operating within the parameters of efficiency and cost benefit analysis as a way to incite them to a semblance of agency. And I think this semblance of agency is a very important point, because one, I think, major similarity between modern games and neoliberal markets is that they give you the feeling to be the agent, and they give you the feeling to be very important with your decisions and the ways you deal with the world. But they try to hide from you that the system is in the end pretty narrow and gives you just a few possibilities and a few roads to go down. But this is hidden from the players as well as it's hidden from people who try to succeed in neoliberal and digital markets as we experience them today. So the message is clear. It's your opportunity. It's your necessity. It's necessary that you try hard, and if you succeed, then you can be proud of yourself because it was your thing. It's pretty much what the American dream has always been about. Everybody can reach everything, and if you don't manage, then you just didn't try hard enough. And this is, of course, where it gets a little problematic. And it's also an aspect that came up in my interviews for several times, or time and time again, that people told me that this pressure that they feel in their physical reality, in the physical world, is one of the motivations why they try to get into games, because in games it's easier to be successful. Games, even though they have complex worlds and complex rules especially, they are easily to look through. It's easier to understand which things that I will do will have which consequences. So for many people I've interviewed, it's like this moving away from power structures that don't seem to give you enough space to get into a counter world, a counter place where you can experience power in a different way. So if Michel Foucault were here, he would say, well, that's an heterotopia, that's a counter place where people can spend some time in order to experience things they cannot experience in other places. But of course, there's also this aspect of what has been called capitalist realism. So outside and inside of the games, it seems more and more impossible to think beyond the rules of capitalism. And that's what we see in many games. And I think we increasingly see that games tell us that it's our responsibility to increase our metrics, and that playing these games, as we've heard about Clash of Clans just now, is just to keep on trying, to keep on increasing your stats, to keep on increasing your metrics. So For example, if I am not able to beat the boss in some game, I would go back to do some grind and to improve my gear and improve my stats, or I might even train to react a few frames faster to come back with better stats in order to be able to beat the game the next time. But as well as a young academic in a neoliberal world, for example, I would try to publish more if I want to make a career. I might try to be more present on social media, get more followers on Twitter in order to get my research out there. And of course, I try to talk at more conferences, because that's the kind of metrics that help you that make an academic career. And that's pretty much the same, of course, in any form of neoliberal markets. And it has been getting a lot stronger since the algorithms of social media sites and internet sites have become so present in our lives. So we try to evade something within the video games. That's something I've learned from my interviews, but some of the logics we try to evade from don't seem to be available in some form, because this logic of capitalism is in the games as well as outside of the games. And if you look at single player action games, for example, thinking of Ghost of Tsushima now, or Assassin's Creed, they have stopped to give you a clear end to the game. So if the credits roll in Ghost of Tsushima, after that, you're thrown back into the world just to keep on improving yourself, keep on to get better gear, to improve your stats, or whatever. So they somehow copy a logic that comes from the online games, because of course in many online games, what is called the late game or the end game content is pretty much what the game is about. So after you've played through a story, after you've reached pretty much everything that you were meant to reach in this game, you're thrown out into this endless cycle, in this hamster wheel of trying to get better and better and better. And this is where we get to Wendy Jun, who wrote I think, very, very interesting and very important book. It's called Updating to Remain the Same. And I think if you're interested in the social aspects of digital media, or what digital media do with us, then I really recommend you to read this book. I was surprised myself that I stumbled upon it only after years of research in this field. And she developed this concept of the new, which is you in capital letters, because she says what those new media seem to scream at us is that it's all about us. It's about you. You can accomplish everything. You have to be out there. You can be an important person, a person of öffentlichem Interesse, as we call it in German. And of course, there is this N, which is this play of word that suggests that you always have to be a new form of yourself. And I think that's one very important thing that you find in video games, as well as in all these forms of digital presence in social media and also on the market. If you're just there with whatever you are able to do, you will lose your status over time. You'll just go down the stairs, because what you really have to do is to keep on trying, to keep on becoming. You need to work on yourself and constantly improve yourself. If you play an online game and just stop increasing your stats, then at some point you will be irrelevant in the game. And it's the same on social media, of course, and in many forms of the market. So what Wendy Jun says is that this you is relentless and would seem to mask the fact that you are actually they. Because what subjectivity means in these contexts is pretty much just a set of numbers. If you think of algorithms, how they work, how Facebook feeds and Twitter feeds work, but also how video games work, and how, for example, the AMS works in Austria at the moment, trying to get people who don't have any jobs back into the job market. They just see you as a set of numbers, and in the end, they pretty much treat everybody the same way, just relying on numbers, and whatever cannot be measured is not relevant for these markets. So they scream at you that you are important, that your agency is in the center of whatever you do. But in the end, there's a lot less agency than people think. And you are pretty much treated like everybody else. So coming to an end, we could argue that playing video games is pretty much the easy mode of neoliberal subjectivity. It's if you play it like that, people won't really acknowledge that you played the game, but you got to know the rules in a way. And that's pretty much what we might do in many video games. We have a easier, we have worlds that make it easier for us to be good neoliberal subjects, to improve our stats and to try hard and to save the world in the end. But it's not really the real thing because, of course, it doesn't have this big impact on what happens outside of the games. But since I don't want to leave you with this very pessimistic thought, I want to pick up something that Agatha presented yesterday in their talk, which is this idea of Bertolt Brecht, of the epic theater. What Brecht said about the theater is that the theater needs to break down the fourth wall in order to make the people realize that this is just one version of the story and that you can think about the story in other ways, and that it's not the destiny of these actors on this stage that have to act out like that, but they could have chosen other ways and they could have come to other endings. And I think even if we're not able to change the games, we can maybe change the way we think about it, especially if we work with gamers in some pedagogic context, for example. We can try to get them into breaking down this fourth wall and to understand that it doesn't have to be that way. And this game could have turned out in different ways. And the very important thing and the very important difference to the Brecht, the theater of Brecht, as I would argue, is that if we realize that these rules don't have to be the way they are, then we don't just realize that for the characters in the game, but since we're inside and outside of the game at the same time, and we are the avatar and are not the avatar at the same time, we could also realize that they don't have to be true for us. So thank you very much. And since I think the break is pretty much gone, I think I'll just follow Eugen into the room number 1, I think it was, so we can go on discussing neoliberal systems and gaming there. Thank you very much.